Good afternoon. I'm glad you could join us today. This is always an extremely busy and interesting time of year here at LJM. The impending holiday season and the announcement of the upcoming year's carrier rate increases always seem to drive heightened interest by shippers in what their current transportation costs are, what they will be, and what can be done to mitigate them. Today, I want to give you a peek behind the curtain of the carrier pricing world, a world I worked in for almost a decade. I want to give you a little insight into how your parcel carriers view your account, how they determine what discounts to give you, and what you can and cannot do to help reduce your parcel costs. At the end of the presentation, there'll be a time for a few questions. If you would like to ask anything, please type your questions when we have reached the end. I will answer as many as time permits. If we can't get to yours, don't worry. We will answer all submissions via email, as well as provide a link to a recording of this session. Parcel cost drivers, how to think like a carrier, and slash shipping costs. Our learning objectives today. First, we want to learn how to think like a carrier when it comes to cost to serve your business. We want to understand what is true carrier cost versus what is fluff, what's flexible, and what is not. We're going to talk about carrier operating ratios and what you can do to influence them. We're going to learn what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. And we're going to learn how everyone wins, both you and the carriers. Before we start, I'd like to share a little bit about LJM Consultants. A lot of you are already LJM clients, and hopefully a few more of you will be. First, we've been in the shipping cost management business since 1998. We have more than 1,100 clients nationwide. We're a leader in the parcel audit and cost management and contract negotiation industry. We've negotiated over 40,000 contracts from both the carrier perspective and the shipper's perspective. We're a frequent contributor to periodicals, to review groups, and to advisory groups. A little bit about myself and why they asked me to come out of the basement to share with you today. I spent 23 years in this industry, including 16 years at UPS. Now, I don't like to admit that I have 23 years of experience in anything, but it does give us a broad market perspective. I spent 8 years in UPS pricing, developing, analyzing, and implementing UPS pricing and costing models. Since then, I've built thousands of UPS incentive agreements and reviewed many thousands more. I probably see 12 to 16 UPS, FedEx, DHL, post office agreements every day, which lets you know just how exciting and thrilling my days are. But it does give us a good sense as to what's going on in the market, what the carriers are willing to offer, what they're not willing to offer. And for the last 10 years, I've been helping shippers negotiate with UPS, FedEx, and the other carriers, and really to help optimize their supply chain. Look at operational changes, operational and supply chain strategies to help improve their bottom line. Now, today we're going to talk about how to think like a carrier. First, we're going to talk about operating ratios. So what is an operating ratio? We're going to go through that, and that is the language of the pricing departments. So we're going to go through that with you a little bit. We're also going to talk about the art and science of carrier pricing. We're going to go through what's mostly cost versus primarily profit for the carriers. We're going to talk about what's negotiable in your contracts and what's not negotiable. So what determines your rate? This is a question that we get all the time, and I think it's a fascinating study. Some of the things will be self-evident, and some of them won't be. And today I want to introduce a few concepts on some things that can have a dramatic impact on your rate that, number one, you may not know about, and number two, you have little, if any, control over. So first, let's just talk about cost and profitability. Now, I highlighted cost because on the cost side, we're going to spend a lot of time on that as we go forward. So we're going to kind of skip over that at this point. But of course, the handmaiden of cost is profitability. How profitable is your account? Those, of course, will be the primary drivers on what your rate is. But there are a number of other factors that are key factors that determine the rate that you're going to pay that have little or nothing to do with you and your account. For example, asset utilization optimization. So what do we mean by that? So at UPS, and I'm going to provide a bit of a UPS-centric perspective today because that's my background. A UPS sort facility, or one of their hub facilities, is most efficient when it's running at between 82 and 84% of capacity. What does that mean? That means it's got plenty of packages, so it achieves economy of scale, which keeps the cost down. But the infrastructure is not overloaded. Therefore, they're not damaging packages, they're not missorting packages, packages aren't being delivered late. So this is optimal for them. Now, what happens when it's not optimal? So if a building is at, say, 70% capacity, they've lost their economies of scale. So they have fewer packages flowing through that building. When that happens, each package that flows through that building carries a higher cost burden when it goes through that package or that facility. So it has to carry more cost as it goes through that building. So it's less efficient. So what will happen if that's the case, the pricing department in the geographic footprint of that building will loosen the screws of pricing, and they'll offer more aggressive rates in order to draw more packages into that building and get it up to peak efficiency. Now again, you have no control over how efficient your local sort facility is, but this is a factor that can have a dramatic impact on the rate that you pay. In addition, on the other side, if a building is running at, say, 105% of capacity, what's the implication there? Well, now the building infrastructure is stressed. There's more damages, there's more missorts, there's more late packages, there's more frustrated employees. So the local pricing department will pull back on pricing because they don't want to add any more packages to this already stressed building, right? So in this case, they're going to offer less aggressive rates because the only new packages they want are ones that are very profitable. Next, business plan. UPS is organized into districts, region, and then a corporate perspective. Where they are to their business plan can really affect the rate that you're able to get. So here we sit at the beginning of November. If a UPS district or a region is, say, at 85% of their business plan, well, that pricing department that's housed within that district or that region is going to very aggressively go after market share to try to hit their business plan. So they're going to offer very aggressive rates between now and the end of the year to try to pull them up so they can hit their business plan. Conversely, if that district's at 115% to business plan, then yield management becomes the order of the day. So they will offer less aggressive rates and try to improve their yields. Of course, the competitive environment always has a factor. What are the competition doing? Are they being aggressive or are they pulling back? And this can be very local. We see a lot of areas where UPS is the only true viable option, and then other areas where it's really FedEx. So depending on the competitive environment, a carrier may or may not need to be aggressive. Another is market perception, and this is important and it's always changing. So we hear all the time in the retail world where 38% doesn't get anyone to open their wallet, but a 40% discount really moves them. The same type of psychology applies to carrier pricing. And then last is shareholder perception, and this is important. Both UPS and FedEx are public companies. Because of that, they are beholden to shareholders and to market analysts. So if the analysts and shareholders expect a gain in market share, you'll see UPS and FedEx discount more aggressively to try to meet those market share goals. If yield management is important, you'll see them pull back on their pricing to try to improve their yields. So these are things, again, that you have no control over, often you'll have even no insight into, but they can really have a dramatic impact on your pricing. And I just wanted to make sure that these were kind of shown a little bit of light so that you can understand some of the factors that go into it. And remember, there's district, region, and corporate perspectives, and they can actually all be different. So the district that you're in may be doing fine, but maybe your region is not. So this can really have an impact on where you stand. Okay, so now let's get back to the cost discussion. Carrier operating ratios. These are critical because it's how your account is evaluated. So in pricing parlance, it's OR. So what is OR? OR is a company's operating expenses as a percentage of revenue. So an OR of 100 represents the break-even point for a carrier. So if your account is evaluated and it's determined that the OR, operating ratio of your account, is 85, that would mean that 15 cents on every dollar for the carrier is profit. Conversely, if you're evaluated and your OR is a 105, that would mean that 5 cents on every dollar for the carrier is loss. So this is how you're looked at. Operating ratios are the primary consideration used to determine your rate, but they are certainly not the only one. So there are different types of operating ratios, and as we move forward, we'll get to why these are so important. There's fully allocated versus long-run marginal. Now, fully allocated operating ratio, what is that? It includes all company costs. So it includes marketing costs, support functions, research and development. Any dollar that's expended by the company is divided up and attached to each individual package. That's fully allocated. Long-run marginal includes only the costs that directly relate to moving your specific packages, things like driver and pilot costs, fuel, hub operations, etc. So it's a much smaller cost pool. Now, what impacts operating ratio at the account level? Things like pickup and delivery processes, so late pickups and trailer pulls, security requirements, day and time specific deliveries. These are all burdens that you place on the carriers and that adds cost to what they need to do. And the higher you drive up their cost, the less aggressive they can be in the discounts that they offer you. Other things are pickup and delivery density, and this is one of the primary drivers of operating ratio, and this is really important. How many packages are being picked up and how many packages are being delivered? Now remember, they don't have to be your packages. So for example, if a driver comes to your location to pick up one package, that one package carries the cost burden of that entire visit, all the fuel, all the driver cost, all the wear and tear on the vehicle, everything that driver had to do to get that package is carried by that single package. If you have 100, you've now divided that cost up 100 times. So each package only carries 1% of that cost. So the more packages that get picked up and delivered at the same place, the more that cost is divided. But they don't have to be your packages. If you're shipping on other people's account numbers, or if other companies are delivering to the same place you are, you can get quote unquote pricing credit for those packages because they divide the cost as well. Now, some other things that drive it: package characteristics, things like the cubic density of your packaging and the packaging itself. Are you giving them a corrugated box, which is what all their systems are designed to deliver? Or are you giving them a 5-gallon bucket that doesn't fit into any of the systems they've designed to deliver? And then have you put any additional hub operational needs on the carriers? Do you have any special handling packages? Are they hazmats that need to be handled specially? Are they high value that needs to be handled specially? All these things drive the cost to serve your packages up, which drives their profitability down, which means their ability to offer you a better discount is degraded. And believe me, they know all of these costs for all of your packages. Okay, some other things that affect it: geographic location. Where do you fit in their network, right? So for example, FedEx Smart Post has 13 regional hubs. How close are you to one of those hubs? If you're 2 miles away, their cost is a lot different than if you're 22 miles away. What is the first point of contact? This is a critical one. Is it a hub or a center? So if it's a small local building that's a center, you have a whole new layer of cost. Whereas if your first point of contact is a hub, you've cut out that whole center connection, and there's a lot more efficient. Do you have any special requirements, temperature controls, special bays that the carrier needs to accommodate? Seasonality. Is your peak their peak? Trust me, UPS is not going out looking for new Christmas packages, which of course is why they've implemented this peak season surcharge. But if you're Bob's Pool Supplies and your peak is in July or August when they're traditionally slow, That's good for them. They like that. It creates more efficient operations during a typically low time of year, and you can get better discounts because of it. And then what's your distribution pattern? So the carriers have in their distribution pattern through the zone methodology they use, they have what we call nonlinear cost recovery. What that means is, of course, UPS charges more for a Zone 8 package than they do for a Zone 2, but it does not rise at the same level as their cost. So they are more profitable for a Zone 2 package than a Zone 8 package. So the lower your zone distribution, the more profitable you are, therefore the more aggressive rate you can obtain. Now, what is a favorable package versus what's an unfavorable package? What are the types of packages that UPS and FedEx really want versus what don't they really want? So what's favorable are packages with high cubic densities. So at UPS, we used to call them the 3 Bs, bullets, bolts, and books. That's what they want. And the reason for that is a UPS or a FedEx truck will cube out before it weighs out, meaning it will get too full to take any new packages before it gets too heavy to take any new packages. So the best packages for them are packages that are small, so they don't take up a lot of room in the truck, but they're heavy so that they can charge a lot for. That's what they want. They also want packages that are operationally efficient. They want corrugated cardboard boxes that are less than 12 by 12 by 12 inches. That's what fits best into their network. They certainly carry millions of packages a year that are outside of that, but their profit on those packages is much smaller than the cardboard conveyable heavy box, which is what they want. They also look at things where there's high pickup and delivery density, close to their building. These are things that, again, drive their costs down. They don't want to come to your location and pick up 2 boxes. They want to come and pick up 200 boxes. Now, what's unfavorable? So the opposite of what we just talked about. Low cubic density packages, right? If you're shipping empty water bottles, stuffed animals, etc. They don't want things that are operationally inefficient. They don't want hazardous material boxes that need to be moved by hand. They don't want high value packages that need to be locked away in a cage. They don't want to come to remote locations. They don't want to handle oversized packages. They'll do it, of course, but they're going to charge a premium for that. Now, how do they use this OR? So there's millions of dollars and countless hours invested in determining what the OR is, in determining the evaluation of operating ratio. So how do they use it? So this is interesting and something that's not well known. Pricing authority in the UPS pricing departments is set within OR targets, not discount caps. So for example, a district pricing manager will be told you can go up to an operating ratio of 85, not you can go up to a discount of 55, right? So what will happen is one shipper, because the operating ratio cap is 85, the best discount they may get is 40%, whereas another shipper in the same district, maybe right next door, could get a 70% discount. It's all dependent on the cost profile of their packages. And those authority levels are different. A district, a region, and a corporate pricing group all have different authority levels. Now, what determines those authority levels? On an account-by-account basis, the factors that determine them are, number one is account size. Clearly, the bigger an account you are, the more leverage that you have there. Competitive threat. Is there a viable competitive threat? And we're going to get into a little bit more of that later. Then some of the things we talked about early. Where are they to their business plan? And how well are they doing with their asset utilization? Now, what can you do to get analyzed under long-run marginal and not fully allocated? This is the critical piece. You want to be evaluated under long-run marginal cost and not fully allocated cost. So there's 2 primary things you can do to do that. First, it is absolutely essential to create a competitive environment, and we're going to go through an example in a minute where I show you that. And secondly is to increase your billed revenue. Well, to this, most people say, well, you know what, if I could sell more, then I would. But it doesn't have to be you're just shipping more. For example, you have inbound packages from vendors. Could they be billed under your account? You have outbound packages that I'm sure get shipped under customer account numbers. Could you shift those to your account? So that's another way that you can move into that long run marginal category, is increase your billed revenue even if you're not increasing the number of packages that you ship. Now, let me give you 3 examples and let you know what the difference is and just how dramatic this impact can be. So in example 1, there's a carrier retention. So we'll again use a UPS centric example. So a UPS customer, it's a current UPS customer that UPS is repricing. They're under $5 million. There's no competitive threat, right? They've been a UPS shipper for 20 years. They go to UPS golf outings. There's a UPS plane on the shipping manager's desk. And the only shipping system they have is from UPS. And these are actual examples from my time as a UPS pricing manager. These are true numbers here. So the pricing authority to offer would be a fully allocated OR of 85. So me as a pricing manager, the highest I could go would be a fully allocated of 85. Now, example 2, carrier retention, so current UPS customer, so that's the same revenue, but now there's a perceived competitive threat. Maybe the shipper has installed a third-party shipping system that would allow them to ship with FedEx. Maybe they've indicated that FedEx has visited them. Maybe the sales rep has seen the FedEx sales rep in the building, what have you. As long as there's a credible perceived competitive threat, nothing else has changed. But now the authority level has risen to a fully allocated OR of 92 or a long-run marginal of 85. So if you just look at the fully allocated comparison, there's 7 additional discount points that are available just because of the perceived competitive threat. In the last example, everything is the same except it's new business. So this is UPS trying to gain market share. Now the authority level goes up to a fully allocated of 98 or a long-run marginal of 92. So the best price can be achieved by switching carriers in this case. Now there's other costs that are associated with that, obviously, but as far as a pure pricing perspective, that's the area that allows for the highest discount. Now the art and science of carrier pricing. So the science is what we've been talking about. It's the cost. It's very data driven. It's based on time studies. It's very precise and calculated. It's based on package characteristics, distribution patterns, geography, etc. So that's the science side of the rate that you're going to pay. Now, the art. What is the art? The art is market and perception. So what are the other carriers offering? This is always a consideration. There are times when carriers will do something specific. Maybe they're trying to penetrate a specific geography. Maybe they're trying to penetrate a specific vertical. If that's the case, then the other carriers have to decide, what are they going to do? Are they going to match that? Are they going to lower their rates to maintain market share? Or are they willing to shed a little market share if it's not as profitable business? Are they willing to defend a certain turf, or are they willing to concede it in exchange for something else? So they're always reacting to what the other carriers are doing. Then the other one, of course, is what do clients view as a good deal, right? This is important because the carriers want to offer something that's perceived as a benefit to their shippers. Now, there are different ways this can be constructed on whether it's truly a benefit or not, but they at least want the perception from their customers to be that their customers are getting a good deal. Then, is this business truly at risk? And if it is, at what level? And this is where pricing managers have a long memory. If you go back, so if you are a UPS shipper and you go to FedEx and you ask them for a bid, and then you stay with UPS, and then 2 years later you go to FedEx and you ask them for a bid, but you stay with UPS, those pricing managers are in their positions a long time, and they will remember that. You know, I was pricing manager for 8 years, so they will remember that. And if you're used as a foil repeatedly, at some point you stop participating. So the question is, if you're asking for rates from me, will you really switch to me if I'm not the incumbent? And if I am the incumbent, the question is, are you really serious about leaving, or are you just trying to drive my revenue down, but no matter what I offer you, you're not going to leave? So that's critical. Then how does the carrier stand to its business plan? What we talked about already. This is a non-cost issue, but it can drive the pricing. And then are there non-cost considerations? And this is always fascinating. So for example, Fred Smith, the founder of Federal Express, in the 80s and 90s, he was very involved in the movie industry. And he determined he wanted to be the carrier of choice for the movie industry. So FedEx started offering very aggressive rates to that market. So you may have two shippers that are identical. The one's in the movie industry and one is not. The ones in that movie industry would get much better discounts. So there are certain verticals that the carriers attack at certain times. There's also certain geographies. For example, we used to see it all the time in the pricing group where industrial engineering would build a new building, and then they would come to pricing and say, we need to fill that building. So in that case, you may get very aggressive rates in the geography of that building in order to try to fill it. And it won't make sense other than the fact that, well, there's a new building there. There can also be, again, vertical considerations. A lot of times there's marketing considerations. If someone is an industry leader, right, the UPS may say, well, I want Dell Computer because it's a great name. So I'm willing to lose money or to just break even in order to have that company in our stable. Okay, what is mostly cost versus mostly profit? And this is important to understand where you can push a carrier and where you really can't. So what are things that are low margin? So things like special handling or adult signature required. So let's talk about that one for a minute. Adult signature required. Now, you know how it normally works. If you're a UPS or FedEx driver, when they come up to your house, you know how it normally works. They pull up, they run up to the front door, they drop your package on the door, they ring the doorbell, they run back. By the time you get to the door, they're already gone. But if there's an adult signature required, now they have to go to the door, they have to ring it, they have to wait. Then Johnny comes and answers the door and you say, can you go get your mom? Yes, she's out back. And he's there for an extended period of time. Well, every second is cost. So an item like this, or an item like special handling, where it's non-conveyable, and the package handlers have to pull it out of the conveyor system, put it on a train, drive it around. There's additional cost there. So it's hard to push on these items because the carrier really does have cost. Now, conversely, there are some very high margin things as well. Things like address corrections. You know, the current rate for UPS for an address correction is $13.40 and it's going up to $15 next year. So there's a lot of margin there. If you have someone looking up a package, first of all, it usually doesn't take them that long to look it up. Secondly, they may charge you that fee on 5 boxes, all going to the same address, even though they only had to look it up once. So there's a lot of margin there. Another one is residential fees. I may not want to admit this, but I was actually part of the UPS pricing department when residential fees were first introduced. And at the time, it made all the sense in the world. UPS drivers were going into residential neighborhoods and delivering 1 package, maybe 2. Well, what happens now? Now they go into that same residential neighborhood and they deliver 1 to 2 packages per house. So their delivery density has gone up, but at the same time, instead of the cost coming down, their residential charges have gone up. So it's become more efficient for both carriers, while at the same time they're charging a higher rate. So there's a lot of room there. And then, of course, things like late payment fees, it's all profit, right? So these are areas where you can push, where there's room to move. And then there are things that kind of you're not really sure which category they fall in, because in one shipper they're in one and another shipper in the other. Things like oversize, DAS, those types of things. Okay, what's negotiable and what's not? So the things that drive your negotiating power, number one, of course, is your volume. The bigger you are, the more leverage you have. The competitive environment. What is the competition giving on? If both carriers dig their heels in on dimensional weight, then you're probably not going to get a dimensional weight concession. But if you're a FedEx shipper and UPS keeps discounting address corrections, then you're likely to be able to get a discount on address corrections with FedEx. The profitability of your account, clearly. And then the relationship you have with both your rep, the local operation, and so forth. That can have an impact. Now, a contract paradigm. And this is something I really want to get across. Nothing is fixed if you have the leverage. Not a single letter in a UPS or FedEx agreement can't be changed if you have enough leverage. And of course, the leverage is the key. And we hear it all the time where the reps position with our customers, well, that's just standard, we can't change it, or that's in every agreement, we can't change it. None of that is accurate. Now, maybe they're not willing to change it for you, but there is nothing in any of those agreements that cannot be negotiated out if you have the proper leverage. And it's always important to remember, it's definitely fair for them to be profitable, right? They don't need to be the ones giving all the time, but it's fair for you to be competitive. And this is a critical concept and one that we see all the time, and it still continues to amaze me a little bit. With 1,100 clients nationwide, we have a really broad market perspective. And we have seen a number of occasions where we have multiple customers in the same market, and they sell similar products for a similar rate. They're both very effective organizations. They both have good marketing departments. The only thing that's separating them from each other is their shipping rates. And in that case, UPS and FedEx and the post office and DHL are determining who is winning and who is losing in that industry based on the rates that they're offering. And it is not uncommon for us to see one customer and another customer with the same characteristics, and one has 15, 17, 19% better rates than the other. Well, if you're on the losing end of that, you just can't be competitive, and everything else is fine. It's simply your shipping rates that are the differentiator in the market, and we see customers winning and losing based solely on the effectiveness of their shipping rates. And we always try to keep that in mind. It's fair for you to have a competitive contract. One of the things we can help you with is determining how competitive your contract really is, because that's one of the single most difficult things for shippers to do, is to look at their rate and determine, do I have a good contract or not? Usually you can only determine, well, this contract's better than the last one, but you have no idea how it stacks up to your competition. Okay, in the negotiation, what are some of the levers that we can pull, right? One is to evaluate where the carrier truly has cost and where they don't. And this is very much a shipper by shipper exercise. So does this shipper have very high cost of pickup because they have to pick up at 9 o'clock and they're not picking up that many packages and they have to use a drop trailer or whatever, right? Or is it very efficient in your operation? Then determine where your transportation spend is focused. And this is important because the reps for many of these carriers are very adept at offering you tremendous discounts in places you never ship any packages, right? And one of the things we see all the time is a shipper will have a lot of 2-pound packages and a lot of 30-pound packages, and UPS or FedEx will say, your average rate's 15 pounds, so I'm going to give you a great 15-pound rate. Well, your average rate is 15 pounds, but maybe you've never ever shipped a 15-pound box ever. So knowing right where your transportation spend is focused is critical, and making sure that the discounts they offer you are focused in those same areas. Decide ahead of time what's important to you before you go into any negotiation, and this is when we help our customers with their negotiations. This is one of the things we spend the most time on. What's important to you? Is it cost or is it time of delivery? And if it is it cost on this subset of packages or this subset of packages? So we really need to spend a lot of time to determine what's important. Where are you going to dig in your heels? Maybe you're going to dig in your heels on, I've got to have that 8 o'clock pickup, right? Or maybe you can give on that. Maybe you can agree to an earlier pickup and let the carrier save a little cost so they can pass some of that along to you. And then it's important to evaluate the overall incentive program. Evaluate what gives and what takes away, and because we see it repeatedly where a carrier will increase a customer's discount and say, well, I've gave you a 70% discount, but when you take minimums to effect and weight breaks into effect and so forth, that 70% all of a sudden is 55%. So you have to be able to evaluate the entire program. Also, it's not uncommon to, in a negotiation process, agree to something in step 1 or in round 1. And then in round 2, all of a sudden that thing previously agreed on has reverted back. So it's critical that every time you see a contract from a carrier to evaluate the entire agreement. You want to make sure nothing's changed that you're not aware of. And then plan for the future. You want to make sure that the agreement that you're getting fits your state today, your state 6 months from now, your state a year from now, your state 18 months from now. It's critical to understand where your business is headed and get an agreement that can accommodate that. And then, so those are the negotiating levers. What are the operational levers that are available to you to pull? Is there anything that you can change operational to improve the carrier's cost picture? So we talked about, can you make your pickup earlier? Sometimes the solution is multiple pickups, right? If you have a 7 or 8 o'clock pickup, all of your packages are hitting the twilight sort of your local UPS or FedEx hub. But if they can come by earlier in the day and do a sweep, say at 1:30 or 2, and take a portion of your packages and push them through their day hub operation, now you've split the burden of your packages between 2 separate operations, and typically the day hub operation is the least efficient. So if you can get some of your packages into their operation early, again, that might improve their cost picture and allow them to offer you a better rate. And it's fine to ask them, and we do it in the negotiations that we assist with repeatedly. Is there anything that we can do that won't impact our customers, but can improve your cost picture? And if you're talking to the right representative from the carrier, and they actually make some of those suggestions, then it's fair for you to ask for a concession in return. There are also solutions like we have many large shippers that will pre-sort packages for UPS and FedEx. One negotiation we worked with, there was an exchange. Our customer wanted a later pickup. The UPS said wasn't sustainable by their hub, but the concession was that our customer would pre-sort the packages in zip code ranges. So they made basically 6 piles of packages, and so those packages, once UPS picked them up, could skip the local hub and go directly to the second stage in the sort. And by doing that, there was no price concession, but UPS was able to accommodate our customer's request for the late pickup. So there was an operational concession that the client made in order to help the carrier make the service commitments that our client was requiring. Next is to evaluate and change and update your box sizes and your packaging techniques, right? The cube is so important to the carriers, which is why they charge so much for it now. But getting that box size to be as small as possible to use up as little space in their trucks is a huge benefit to the carriers. Also, trying to get everything you can in a conveyable package, right? Anything that can go on a conveyor belt dramatically improves the economies of scale for the carriers versus things in 5-gallon buckets or things wrapped in saran wrap, those types of things. Those add tremendous cost to the carrier, and if you can help take that cost out of their operation, then they can pass some of those savings on. And then mode optimization. So this helps both you and the carrier. If you can choose when it's most efficient to send ground versus air or 2-day versus next day, those types of things will help you save money up front, but they also help the carrier because a lot of times they're not as stressed with time and transit commitments. And then if you make these concessions to the carrier, what can they pass along to you? Right? There should be some concession back, either financially or through operational flexibility that they give you, and that really strengthens that partnership. There is no need for negotiation to be a win-sum game. You can always do something to help them, and they can help you. And it can actually strengthen the partnership that you have with your carrier or with your new carrier if we take this kind of partnership approach where if we help you save this, then you can help us save this. So really, to sum this up, we want to help you think like a carrier, right? And improve your cost by helping you improve their cost. So that really wraps it up. I know we covered an awful lot of ground really quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions now. and you'll forgive me. It may take a little while because obviously these are typed, but I will read through them and select the questions that seem best for the group, and I'll answer them out loud. I'll read the question and answer them out loud. And then, as I said, if we don't get to yours, don't worry, we'll email you the answer. And then also feel free to email us if you think of a question later tonight when you're driving home. If you want to ask us a question, you can do that, and then we'll respond to that in kind. So I'm just going to give us a second to get a few questions in. Okay, so the first question I have is, what is the best time of year to negotiate rates? So that's a great question. There really isn't a best time because a lot of these factors change. Now, one thing that is critical is to always keep in mind when your peak seasons are and when the carrier rate increases are. So, for example, if your peak season is the summer, right? If you're a pool supply company, you want to make sure that your contract is in place before your peak season. And we hear it all the time where people say, you know, this is my busy time of year. I want to wait until that's over before I negotiate. You really want to take the opposite approach where you say, this is my busy time of year. I want to make sure that I get my new rates in place before that time of year hits, because that's really going to be important for you. I was asked for a copy of the presentation. Absolutely. We will email a copy of the presentation out to all attendees when we're finished. Okay, here's an interesting one. What should the target incentive tier be with UPS? So this is variable depending on your agreement, but this is critical. So both UPS and FedEx give what they call self-regulating contracts. So that means the more you ship, the higher discount you get. If your shipping drops, then your discounts also drop. You want to make sure, so on a typical UPS or FedEx agreement, if you have 6 tiers, your target tier is really the 3rd tier, sometimes the 4th tier, but really the 3rd tier. You want to make sure that if you fall out of a tier, so if you drop down 1 tier, that you don't have a huge penalty, because often what will happen is you drop 1 tier and you lose 7, 8, 9, 10%. So you want to try to structure it so that if you do drop a tier, you're only using a few percentage points. You also want to make sure you understand how they base that calculation. That calculation can be based on a quarter, it could be based on annually, it could be based on net transportation charges, it could be based on gross transportation charges. So make sure you analyze what's going into that tier and make sure it's something that you can reasonably hit. Okay, I have one that says, how will you find out the OR? Will the rep tell you? If that rep tells you what your OR is and someone finds out about it, he will not be a rep for very long. That is not information the carriers ever want to share, and in fact, most of the time, the pricing department will not share that information with the rep. So I would encourage you to ask, and if they share it, call me immediately, and we'll go out to lunch and we'll have a good time with that negotiation. But on average, they will not share that information. Okay, I have one that says, have you seen carriers stop giving discounts on fuel surcharges and taking away guaranteed deliveries? Fuel surcharge discounts are not uncommon at all. Again, it depends on the shipper size. If you ship $200,000 a year, you will not get a discount on your fuel. If you ship $10 million a year, you can easily get a discount on your fuel. As far as taking away the delivery guarantees, that's a negotiable contractual item as well, and something that we generally counsel if to not accept in your contract. So if they say, hey, we'll give you an extra 0.5% if you waive your right to file for late packages, the only reason they're doing that is they've done the calculation and they will lose more money if you file than if you sign that agreement. So we rarely recommend that you would sign such an agreement. So here's another one. Are poly bags versus boxes problematic for UPS and FedEx? So for poly bags, envelopes, anything that is small enough, basically I would say shoebox size and smaller is not a problem because it's handled through a whole separate network called the small sort. So if they're that small, it's not a problem. If they're larger than that, as long as they can go on a conveyor belt, they're okay. The problem is if it will not go on a conveyor belt, that's when you run into problems. And those conveyor belts have metal chutes. They have turns in them that are metal. Things like saran wrap around packages will get them stuck on those turns, those metal turns. And when they get stuck, that's when things start to get damaged. So they try to keep them out of the conveyor system. So that can create a problem. If they're small enough, it's really not a problem. Okay, here's one. What is a typical length of time that should take to reevaluate and negotiate your carrier agreements? So a typical negotiation, this also depends on the size and complexity of your account. It depends on the responsiveness of your rep. We have one rep that we know of in the Northeast who I think he's on his 6th grandmother dying. So his negotiations also take quite a while. If you have a responsive rep, and you're, say, under a $10 million shipper, I would expect a 60 to 90 days as typical. 45 would be great if things go quickly. It could stretch to 120 if things don't go quickly, but 60 to 90 is a good benchmark for a time frame. Okay, here's one. How best to negotiate a pre-existing contract? So it's always more difficult to negotiate a contract with your incumbent carrier than a new carrier because all your current incumbent carrier sees is a reduction in yield and not a winning business. So they're going to be less aggressive. And as we kind of went through with the presentation, the key thing there is going to be to create a competitive environment. And if you can, to increase your shipping volumes so that they do see some benefit to giving you a better rate. If you can do those two things, that would really help. All right, what is the ideal term for a carrier agreement? 3 years, 5 years, etc. Now, most carrier agreements, they're standard for 3 years. Now, here's the thing that's critical to remember, and this is kind of falls into that negotiation paradigm. Your agreements are just that, agreements. And just like the carriers can raise your rates whenever they feel like it, just like every year you get a rate increase, just like whenever they want, they can add a new accessorial, change dim divisors, introduce new calculations for fees, you can exit that agreement whenever you want. So just because you signed a 3-year agreement does not mean you need to go the entire 3 years. We've had customers, in fact, it's very typical for us when we help a customer negotiate, they sign a 3-year agreement. Oftentimes, we do not get to the end of that agreement before we renegotiate. If anything changes with you that's significant, so if you increase in size, we had one customer in 2016 that bought 2 competitors, and we negotiated them 3 times in 1 year. So if anything changes with you, for example, you grow, you contract, you introduce new product lines, it may be appropriate to renegotiate, even if it's less than the term. And if anything changes in the market. So an example there was we have a customer that ships rugs. Everything they do is rugs. And last year we finished negotiating for them in March. Well, in June, UPS changed the additional handling calculation from 60 inches to 48 inches. In doing so, they were going to apply an additional $10.50 charge to every single package that this customer would have shipped. Well, that obviously would have been catastrophic. So 3 months after negotiating, we negotiated again, and the reason we did it was UPS and FedEx changed the marketplace, and so we had to react. So I have one, is a $500,000 spend considered a large enough account? And what discounts should be expected? So a $500,000 shipper should definitely be under a contractual agreement. There's no question, and we see it all the time where people that ship $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 are still paying book rates. You definitely can qualify for a discount at that level. Now, the type of discounts really depend, as we talked about, on the type of packages. So if you ship $500,000 in water bottles, your discount is going to be very different than if you ship $500,000 in books. So that's going to be very heavily dependent on your characteristics. And that's one of those instances where if you just want to get in touch with us, we can do a review of your package characteristics, and then we'll be able to tell you, well, this is the type of discount we should be able to get for you. Okay, here's a question. Is it common or possible for UPS to offer different incentives by zone, like larger incentives for zone 8 or zone 45? This does happen. I would not say it's common, but it is certainly possible. And we've put a number of these programs in place, particularly for shippers that are trying to match the Amazon model, where they may be using ground for close zones and then second day air for longer zones because they have to have everything delivered in 2 days. We will oftentimes have a ground discount that's different in the short zones than the long zones, and then the 2-day air discount that's different as well. So again, it's not common, but it is certainly something that we've put in place, and it is something that the carriers will support. Okay, here's a great one. We've had a situation where UPS was willing to offer better tier discounts if we could increase our volume by 25%. We had no problem with that. But if we didn't meet those targets, the tier would revert to less than their current discount. What has created this impasse and what should we do? So that is very common. I would say that is 98 out of 100 times that is the tact they will take. So basically they're rewarding you if you give them more business, but if you stay the same, then you'll actually be worse off than you currently are. And that is very common. And that is something that I, as a shipper, would not accept and can be negotiated out. So we almost every contract we deal with that exact same scenario. And if approached properly, that can definitely be negotiated out where you're not penalized if you don't give them additional business. So very common tactic, but if handled appropriately, that can definitely be overcome. Okay, what is the best way to negotiate against the GRI when nothing else has changed? So the GRI is a yearly heartburn for everybody. And that in it of itself, because it's so significant, this year they're looking at a base rate increase of 4.9%. But of course, that only applies to the base rates. That doesn't include all the accessorial increases. So if the base rate is 4.9%, the average increase is probably something more like 8 or 9%. And almost no business has any other expense that increases 8 to 9 to 12% year after year after year after year after year. So that in and of itself is an impetus to renegotiate, and we use that effectively. The key there is to be able to quantify what the GRI impact is for you individually and specifically, because as soon as you bring it up to them, they're going to mention that, well, it's 4.9%. You need to be able to counter with data that says, well, based on my profile, based on my accessorials, based on my weights, my increase is actually 12%. And when you think about it, the carrier is going to get, let's just take even a more conservative number, 8%. The carrier is getting 8% more money, and they have not delivered one more package. The driver has not taken one more step. They've not used one more gallon of gas, right? So they're getting 8% more revenue, and they have zero additional cost. There's no question that some of that should be able to be passed on to you. Okay, here's one that's good. I get this question a lot. What is an electronic PLD bonus? So this is very confusing the way it's written into the contract. So basically what the UPS and FedEx are doing, and because it's PLD, it's probably a UPS contract, they're basically saying, we'll give you 10% discount if you give us data electronically, right? Now here's where the misinterpretation comes. Because it's at the end of the contract, the way you read it, and it makes perfect sense, and I've actually had UPS reps explain this wrong repeatedly. it is not in addition to the 10% you already have, to the discounts you have earlier in the agreement. So let's just say you're reading through the agreement, and let's just take a ground package. You have 10% in your base rate in your matrix. You have another 5% in your performance tier, so you have 15% discount. Then you read the PLD bonus. So your natural inclination is to say, well, I have 10 plus 5, here's a PLD bonus, another 10, I have 25%. No. The PLD bonus is built into your base rate discounts. So basically what they're saying is if you don't give us PLD, we're taking 10% out of the rate we've already quoted you. So your natural inclination is to add it in, but instead it's already built in, and all they're basically saying is you're going to lose 10 if you don't give it to us, which is, it's very confusing the way it's written. All right, and I've got a bunch more here, but I only got a couple more minutes, so I'm going to knock out as many as I can. But as I said, if I don't get to it, I promise we'll answer it. Let's see. Can you negotiate dimensional factor? Absolutely. Again, here, data is the critical piece in that. We want to make sure you understand exactly what your dimensions are and what your divisor needs to be. But if you're big enough, you can negotiate it. And in today's day and age, you don't necessarily have to be overly big in order to get a dimensional divisor adjustment. Okay, what is the fee structure of your negotiation services? So we work our negotiation services the same way, in general, the same way we do our audit services, where we charge a percentage of savings. So for example, if we don't charge anything up front, we go through the whole negotiation process. Once your new rates are in place, what we'll do is we'll rate every shipment you make through your old agreement and then your new agreement. And if we save you $100, we'll just take a portion of that. So there's no upfront fee. You're basically paying us out of the rates you used to pay UPS or FedEx, just not quite as much. Okay, here's a good one. How do your supplies, for example, your security boxes, printers, etc., impact your OR? In general, they have a very small impact on it. So I would not discontinue your use of those types of services. They have a very, very small impact on those types of things. So I would not discourage you from using those. All right, and I'm going to do one more, and then we'll move on. Is there any benefit to using two carriers at the same time? So that's a great question. It really depends on your size. So for example, if you're a $1 million shipper and you split ship and you give half and half, now you're two $500,000 shippers and you're not going to get the most ideal rate. However, if you are a $50 million shipper and you give $5 million to one and 45 to another, that's actually a good strategy as long as the $5 million you're giving to one is very targeted, say just international or something like that. So I think I'm about out of time, but I really appreciate everyone joining us today. We're going to do this every quarter where we choose a new topic that we see come up while we're going through things with our clients and just try to educate you a little bit on the market. As I said, we'll email out answers to all the questions I didn't get to. I apologize if I didn't get to yours, and then we'll also send out a link to the presentation. But thanks again, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate the opportunity to get out of the basement every now and again, and I hope that we get to see you on the next one. Thank you very much.